Who is the fastest rising offensive tackle? We talk about that next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube. Also, check us out everywhere that you get your podcast. Just search for Unbearable Sports. Happy Easter, everyone. I'm flying solo today. PayPal had a whole bunch of stuff going on this weekend. He put together this awesome desk for his girlfriend, and yeah, he's been exhausted. So he's like, yeah, I don't really have a mock draft for today, but don't worry. I have 3 for you today. We're using the new TDN mock draft machine that's available. And I've been a big fan of the Draft Network and a lot of their stuff. So I'll kind of give a little bit of a review of this mock draft machine as well, because I've been waiting for this. And I feel like a lot of us have been waiting for this, especially since PFF put that paywall up. So today we are going to be breaking down 3 mock drafts, and I have a theme for this, right? Because I can tell you guys what I am thinking right now. If I'm Ryan Poles, I'm going offensive tackle, first pick. And then I'm going in the next 3 picks, I'm going D tackle, D end, right? That's how most of us feel. But today I really wanted to switch things up because Ryan Poles has said he wants to go best player available. And there's all sorts of rumors. Twitter is just so much fun that we have all these rumors that the Bears would go with Jalen Carter. The Bears will go with Jackson Smith and Jigba. The Bears will go with Tyree Wilson. So what we're doing today is breaking down what if they did that and how does that change the offensive tackles? Because on this show, we've talked about it. Both PayPal and myself are not big fans of the tackles that are on day 2. There's some, but there's not a lot. And if you missed that, we did a show all about that with 5 early and 5 late offensive tackles. But news broke today, and I'm hoping this is going around more, but Tevin Jenkins is going to be a left guard. That's what he said on Twitter. It was confirmed by someone out on Twitter that it looks like he is going to be that left guard, and that's the Bears' idea, is that he's going to play left guard. So now it's like, all right, well, crap, now we need a right tackle, right? Because do we want Larry Borum out there? Do we want Alex Leatherwood? Those are our 2 options at right tackle right now, and that's not pretty. And also in free agency, there's not a lot of people out there. So that's why in these, I'm saying, what if the Bears do what they say and basically go with best player available if someone ends up dropping, right? So that's a big question out there. And J-Rock was saying, what D tackles will be there at 53? That's another big thing too, because a lot of the defensive tackles, we always projected Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. He's not really showing up now because now he's no longer the best kept secret. Now people are like, Keanu Benton, this dude can play everywhere. So a lot of D tackles are becoming a little bit harder to find, and you'll see that with some of these mocks later on. But yet again, I'm using the Draft Network's mock draft machine, and it's good. It's very different, and I think that's what makes it fun. But that's what makes it also difficult for someone like me to create a mock draft, because they try and factor in some of the randomness that's going on. And if you haven't used it, I suggest playing with it, because the more mock draft machines you can play with, the more perspectives you can get on the NFL draft. So let's get started on this, because the first mock draft that I put together, I was thinking, because I was thinking about this during the week, because all the rumors are coming out. Bears have this, actually, this isn't a rumor. The Bears have met with Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia, twice, right? Bears are doing their due diligence. What if Jalen Carter were to drop, right? Jalen Carter saying, I'm not getting past the top 10. So I was like, you know what? I want to, because a lot of people had Jalen Carter at number 1 to the Bears. In this mock draft, with the 9th pick overall, the Bears are selecting Jalen Carter. And I wanted to just see, what does this do to the draft if I select Jalen Carter at number 9? So Jalen Carter, fearsome defensive tackle out of Georgia that can drop because of a lot of the off the field question marks. And yet again, if the Bears check him off the list and say, listen, you are good, you check all the boxes from a character perspective, so we don't feel that worried about you. You get the best disruptive 3 technique in this entire draft by far. Watch the tape. It's insane. But yet again, you have those questions about character that I've brought up multiple times on this show. I don't it's if they buy the character, who am I? Just some guy with a mic, right? I haven't talked to Jalen Carter, but on tape, he seems out of position. He doesn't seem like he gives it all 110% every single down. Doesn't seem to fit the hits principle. But the thing that he does fit is that he's a freaking good football player. So if he is on the board and he checks the boxes for them, how does this shake up the draft? Right? So if Jalen Carter, best player available, we get him. We have our 3 technique of the future. And one thing too, just like with Warren Sapp, who's a big comp with Jalen Carter, Warren Sapp dropped because of his character. That dude is wearing a gold jacket right now. Is Jalen Carter in that similar situation, or are those red flags legit red flags that the Bears need to be concerned about? But right now in this first mock draft, Jalen Carter dropped to the Bears, and I said, why the heck not? Let's see how this changes up the draft. So as the draft went on, something that I noticed about the mock draft machine at TDN is that they love offensive tackles and defensive tackles. So if you go out there and try it, you'll be like, now I know what Brad means, because every offensive tackle was off the board. Every defensive tackle was basically off the board. But what do I think is actually going to happen? I know a lot of people say, well, go with an offensive tackle. Jalen Duncan is kind of the favorite to go in the second round out of Maryland. The Bears have visited with him. But the thing that I don't love about Jalen Duncan is the dude let up 7 sacks last year, and he let up even more the year before. He lets up a lot of stuff, and he's very raw. He's a developmental prospect. And if the Bears need someone to start today, that's where I don't love the situation that the Bears are necessarily in at this right tackle spot, if indeed Tevin Jenkins is most likely going to be that left guard. So with that, we don't have anybody. And that's why it does seem like we have to draft someone. And with this, I didn't necessarily want to trade until the later ones. So spoiler alert, I do trade in the other ones. But I just wanted to see, how did it kind of situate? And J-Rock makes a good point. Jalen Carter, 6 career sacks and 18 and a half. Unimpressive versus Kalijah Kancey, 7 sacks and 14 and a half tackle for losses this year. That's a very good point. And I think Jalen Carter, he's more situational. He could do a lot more things. Kalijah Kancey, definitely a specific 3 technique, but man, Kalijah Kancey's film is fun. Fun fact, I looked at Kalijah Kancey. Could he play the defensive end position? And I looked at his snaps at the defensive end spot. It didn't look fluid, and also he's a little bit too big for the defensive end spot. But yeah, honestly, if Kancey, there's a couple mock drafts where Kancey actually dropped to the Bears in the second round, and I was like, oh, I love this, but I can't do a legit mock with Kancey going in the second, because that would be sick to get that defensive end. But let's see, or a defensive tackle, but let's see who actually ended up going. And it's my boy, Felix Anudike-Uzomah. He's one of my favorite players out there, not necessarily saying because he's amazing, but it's more so I like where the Bears can get him, and I think he can do it all at the defensive end spot. Now, with this mock too, if you think about it, this could be where if, let's say that Tyree Wilson falls to the Bears and the Bears want to go Tyree Wilson, this is where essentially Keanu Benton, the defensive tackle out of Wisconsin, could potentially go as well. But Felix Anudike-Uzomah, very good junior, 6'4", 255, 16% pass rush win rate, great bend, elite NFL bend, and just has that next layer to his game, can play every single down. But the biggest weakness is consistency. This guy has all pro film, all pro highlights, but when you watch his film, you're like, that's good. And that's why he's going into the second round with some good training and just constantly, I don't think it's an effort thing. I think it's more of just a technique and just like having enough stamina with that. But he's a very good player and a true defensive end for the Chicago Bears. And right then, your defensive line looks a lot more ferocious with Uzama and also Jalen Carter. But let's go to the next pick. And like I said, a lot of these offensive linemen are a lot of offensive tackles off the board. So even a Matthew Bergeron, who's projected to go in the second round, was off the board too. And Bergeron, I'm still not a huge fan. I think he's more of a swing tackle than someone that you're going to say you're going to start day one, right? So that's where I ended up going. Well, we have our defensive line. What else can we go with? I was thinking maybe corner, but you know what? I know that there's a lot of fans that just want to get a new center. I go up and down if the Bears would go with this, but ultimately I went with Luke Weipler, the center out of Ohio State, junior, 6'3", 303. And truth be told, we've talked a little bit about him, but we haven't dove deep into him. The comp is kind of that Garrett Bradbury from the Minnesota Vikings, projected to kind of go in that second, third round range. And he's got phenomenal technique. He's wise beyond his years just with the way that he plays. Great hands, great feet, and also can really use leverage very well. But the big weakness is even though he's great with leverage, the dude's only 303 and is pretty much a center. He's not going to play any other position. So some people don't love that positional versatility. He technically didn't really play with Justin Fields. Might have played, I think it was like 13 snaps with Fields. So was a teammate in 2020, but that was about it. But he fits the scheme. He's a good zone blocker and allowed 1 sack in 2 years as the starter. Before that, there was Josh Myers, who was the starting center. And Weipler essentially filled in for that, but ended up leaving early and declaring because he's like, hey, I'm good. I'm going out for the draft. And he's been steadily increasing and looking like a good player that would also be able to fit the Bears system. But yet again, the Bears covet versatility. Weipler doesn't have that. That versatility really is framed as a true center. And at this pick too, the Draft Network always had Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz going a lot higher. So Weipler was kind of the only one that was really kind of sitting around for me. So I was like, might as well. Do I think the Bears go center? I think that ideally the Bears are probably going to go center day 3. That's kind of feels like the sweet spot with like Ricky Stromberg out of Arkansas and Juice Scruggs out of Penn State, because it feels like they want someone to compete, but they feel good about maybe Lucas Patrick versus Cody Whitehair on that center spot. But let's go to my next spot, right? And we still don't have an offensive tackle. So this is where the people that watch on YouTube, this is where the thumbnail comes in. This guy literally a week ago was being picked in the 200s. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was a Mel Kiper mock draft because he truly controls where people go. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was something else. But this guy rocketed from 200 to now going in the third round, and that is Wanya Morris. I end up selecting him with our third round pick, offensive tackle out of Oklahoma. He's a senior, 6'5", 307. Probably haven't heard much about him. And that's because, yet again, he was projected to go in the 7th. He was projected to go in the 6th about a week ago and just rocketed up, literally doing nothing. Crazy how this thing goes. But with this, his comp is more of TJ Clemens. And this is a former 5-star recruit, 2 years at Tennessee, 2 years at Oklahoma. His 2 years at Tennessee, he really struggled. I believe PFF gave him a grade of 20.4 pass block grade his first year at Tennessee. So why is he going in the third round? It's his upside. Every year he has progressed better and better and better. And yet again, he's got these incredibly long arms too. I believe it's 35-inch arms. So people see the length, people see the size, people see his quickness. When he's out in space, he does a very good job at locating what defender he needs to block. And so that's why a lot of people are saying, this guy's got the talent. This guy has this upside. He can play the tackle position. And also last year, yes, he was bad his freshman year, but last year, a 98.3 pass block efficiency, which ranked 32nd overall. And yeah, he's let up 2 sacks over the past 3 seasons each year, but still, he's shown a lot of progression, and that's why a lot of people are going up on him. doesn't have great technique. He's still working on everything, but this is a work in progress that I could see the Bears looking at and going, I think we could maybe do something with him. And I think that's where I think the Bears could be looking at a player like this. This is someone that we're not really talking about too much. So Wanya Morris, offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, could be someone the Bears look at and say, you know what? He's still developmental, but the big difference between him and like a Jalen Duncan has led up a million sacks, while Wanya Morris, 98.3 pass block efficiency, 32nd in the NCAA. That's not bad compared to Jalen Duncan just being bad at pass blocking. So that's one of the big people that really kind of stuck out. But as I continued going through this draft, the next player that I pick in the 4th round, Travius Hodges Tomlinson, love the guy, cornerback, TCU. Big reason the guy can play on the inside slot. He can also play on the outside. We preach about him all the time. So we probably don't need the THT love too much, but he's a very good, very twitchy corner, and the Bears do need a corner. And I think if you draft him in the 4th round, especially, that's very, very good value for the Bears and someone that I believe could easily get a starting spot on this roster as either a slot. I mean, primarily as a slot, I would say, just because of his short stature at 5'8". Let's continue going down, and this is where the Draft Network's mock draft machine is a little bit different because this player always dropped into the 4th round, and it's most likely because they had this guy ranked around 120, and he was always seemingly dropping. And a big reason, too, there's a lot of wide receivers out there. So that's where, with pick 134, I have the Chicago Bears drafting Nathaniel Tank Dell, wide receiver out of Houston. Now, the Bears, they need they have 3 starting wide receivers, but it wouldn't hurt to draft a wide receiver later on, such as the 4th round. This is where it's a little crazy because he's projected to go in the 2nd and 3rd round. But if you use the Draft Network's simulator, this is where all simulators are different. And he kept going in the 4th round. And I said, I'm going to draft you because I can't reject you all these times if you keep showing up. But Nathaniel Tank Dell, a little bit about him, 5'8", 165, junior out of Houston. And his biggest NFL comp is honestly Darnell Mooney. And the biggest strength, this dude, big playability, and his weakness, you probably heard it in the description, 165 pounds. Speaks for itself. This dude is light. Now, we've seen people like the Slim Reaper, Devontae Smith, out of the Eagles do well. And Tank Dell turned all sorts of heads at the Senior Bowl, and Lord knows that the Bears love their players. And actually, I put junior. He was a senior. COVID rules always throw everything off. But Tank Dell was unguardable. Everyone was like, this Tank Dell guy, no one can guard him in the one-on-ones. No one can guard him in drills. Ultimately didn't participate in the actual game itself. But you have this lightweight person. And can this outlier do something big? And I think if you're the Bears, you need talent. You need talent at this wide receiver spot. Why not take a flyer at someone that, especially if he drops to the 4th, like, heck yeah, if it's 2nd or 3rd, that's a little more questionable, but in the 4th, then by all means. But he's a big play waiting to happen. Over 1,300 receiving yards in 2 straight seasons. And a couple other things besides his weight, right? If his weight was his only concern, then maybe he's a Devontae Smith going in the 1st round. But he has dropped 21 passes on 220 catchable passes. And also, when you watch his routes, he almost like oversells everything that he does. He's a slow route runner because he's really trying to fake the person out. So just needs a little bit more refinement on some of these routes. And then I think Tank Dell would be a lot better of a wide receiver prospect. But Tank Dell in the 4th round, don't mind at all. Let's keep on going to the next pick. So I'm actually going I'm actually going 5 rounds. So normally we've been going 1, 2, and 3. But with this, I also wanted to show a little bit more on the Draft Network's mock draft machine just to kind of see who drops in this, because there's somewhere I'm like, okay, I will take this, right? Because in the 4th round, we're getting THT and Nathaniel Dell, which I'm more than fine with. But will that happen? I think Nathaniel Dell, not so much. But let's go to round 5, where the Bears do need a running back. And this is where we have not talked about this guy, but I think that this would just be fun. The Bears like their speed, and that's where the Bears are getting Devon Achane at pick 137, running back out of Texas A&M, junior, 5'9", 188. And this guy kind of reminds me a little bit on CJ Spiller. He's also projected to kind of go in that third, potentially fourth round. Fifth, yet again, a little rich. The Draft Network has that a little bit later on, but the speed, the quickness, this guy is a pinball out there. You just see him bouncing off of people. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Tariq Cohen, the way that he runs, where he just kind of run into blocker to blocker to blocker, and he just has this instant start, instant stop. It's really fun to see, but biggest question, his toughness. And I hate saying toughness because it makes it seem like he's a wimp. He plays football, he gets tackled. He's a tough guy, but I'm not seeing him lower the shoulder and get the extra yards. He's a speed guy. He'll run as fast as he can. And then if someone can drag him down, then awesome. But he has great contact balance. And when you combine that with speed, it's really, really dangerous to try and get someone like this. But also, big con of his, not great from a pass pro perspective, really needs coaching on that. That's the only thing that I don't really love about this prospect in the later rounds, because we need, maybe that's more Travis Homer, but it's hard to put a running back out there that is going to run a route. And that is one thing too. Achane is very good at running routes as a running back, not elite, but good. And so he can be a good receiving threat out of the backfield, something that I really like out there. Looking at some other details too, but yeah, just doesn't really pound for any extra yards out there. But yeah, definitely the fastest running back. And I think what we're seeing out the Bears is that they like the speed and they like the home run ability. Achane gives you that home run ability. Only thing he doesn't give you is the grinding for the extra yards, but that's why you got Deontay Foreman, right? So I think Achane late is a really good spot, and he kind of replaces good old cement shoes Ebner on this draft on the Bears, because Ebner was supposed to be that. But Lord knows, like, I don't love saying move on from someone after 1 year, but the way that Ebner looked, he just didn't look like he belonged in the NFL, and I hate saying that. But the last pick, yet again, this one's just going to be 5 rounds for this first one, and I have the Bears' last pick in this draft being Isaiah McGuire, defensive end out of Missouri, at pick 150. Now, we've broken him down before, but I don't believe we've actually drafted him. He is projected to go in the 4th round, drops to me in the 5th round, and I'm like, we need defensive end help, so why not? Because if you have a player like that, we have versatile defensive ends that can play some defensive tackle and assist there. And I like the idea of at least loading up on some defensive ends and keeping that rotation going. Senior, 6'4", 268. Comp reminds me a little bit about Preston Smith because of his overall power that he tries to win with. Good at setting the edge, and having someone that you can get in these later rounds that can set an edge is usually rare, especially since he has some decent speed to him. But still, my biggest question mark is his burst. He's got good bend. He can set the edge. But when I see him rocket off, it just doesn't look as great as you would want out of someone that kind of wins with more of like a bull rush or power types of moves. So a little bit of a question mark, but 7 sacks in 2022 and had a pass rush win rate of 17.2%. So overall, though, this was the mock draft that says, what if Jalen Carter falls? And what I have, Bears going with Jalen Carter at 9, then Felix Anudike-Uzomah at pick 54, the edge out of Kansas State, and interior offensive lineman Luke Weipler out of pick 62, and at pick 65 in the 3rd round, Wanya Morris, the raising offensive tackle out of Oklahoma. And at 104, we have Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, then Tank Dell at 134, Devon Achane running back out of Texas A&M at 137, and at 150, Isaiah McGuire, the edge out of Missouri. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Yet again, I wanted to do this as if Jalen Carter was there and the Bears could not get an offensive tackle, or like Bears to go, we're drafting best player available no matter what. He's available. We love him. We're getting our 3 technique, right? That's what I wanted to run through with this. But there is another player that the Bears have been tied to, that they're like, the Bears love him. Yet again, this is the other Twitter rumor. Bears are drafting Jackson Smith-Njigba no matter what. No matter what, at pick number 9, they're going with Smith-Njigba. We're going to run the same exercise with that next. But real quick, before that, if you want to get into sports betting, go with America's favorite sports book, which is betus.com. BetUS, link down in the description. BetUS, use promo code unbearable for 125% back on your first deposit. So let's get into this second mock draft that I did. And then the third one we'll just kind of fly through real quick. So second draft, we have to go with Jackson Smith-Njigba. That's what we're going to be breaking down. No offensive tackle, because we're going to go yet again with quote unquote best player available and see how this switches it up. But instead of waiting until the third round, what we're going to do is we're going to trade up, because there is someone that Chicago Bears fans love. And we've talked a little bit about this, but we haven't talked about this prospect too much. It's a guy that goes by the name of Darnell Wright, tackle out of Tennessee. Now, where the Bears are at right now, it's kind of bad because there's some tackles that are good that are going in the early second round. But Lord knows we traded that early second round pick away. So now what happens? What if the Bears were to trade back? Now, this is kind of goes against what Ryan Poles is saying, what Ryan Poles would want to do. But yet again, did he not trade up because that's just who he is and he believes in the analytics that say don't trade up? Or is it because he was trying to get more draft picks? That's why with this is more of an exercise to see what would this even look like? What would it take to trade up to potentially get a player like Darnell Wright? So, like I said, I kind of spoiled my first pick already. At pick number 9, the Bears can't resist themselves. And they say, we have to get Jackson Smith-Njigba no matter what. We have to get Justin Fields, his boy, and we can't trade down because we have to have him, right? Bears go Jackson Smith-Njigba. Pick number 9, wide receiver, Ohio State, 6'1", 200 pounds. And really the big comp, I always like Robert Woods. I think Danny Amendola was one of the comps as well. But this guy, just phenomenal route runner out there. So if the Bears want this wide receiver and need to get this wide receiver, and they feel like they need to get him at number 9, this is what it's going to be looking like. So former 5-star recruit, like we said, 1 true year of production. No doubt, as Justin Fields has said, that he wants Jackson Smith-Njigba to play with him, but ran 83.8% of his snaps out of the slot, and he was his quarterback's best friend, 81.95 completion when targeted. So that's where Jackson Smith-Njigba, though, if the Bears want a wide receiver and they really want him, this is where they would get him, right? And essentially they could trade down, which you'll see a little bit later. But if they really feel like he's the guy and they really feel like he's best player available, and that's what Ryan Poles' strategy is, they get him at number 9, right? They get him at number 9. They end up selecting the receiver. So now what does that mean from an offensive tackle perspective? Because we broke it down in the last one. If you don't love Jalen Duncan and you don't love Matthew Bergeron, and like for me, not a big fan of those players. But what about the third round, right? You could get a couple other players, but do you want to draft someone in the third round and have them as the starter, as the person that's going to protect Justin Fields? Now, in free agency, there's still like George Fant. There's still a couple other players. Nothing crazy out there and nothing great, but that's where I don't love the idea of it. So let's say the Bears want to trade up, right? What would that take? Now, I was watching the Bears draft, or I was watching the draft And as soon as basically all the offensive tackles went off the board, I went, you know what? I got to trade up. So I ended up having to trade to pick 26. Yet again, the Draft Network absolutely loves offensive tackles and drafting them high. So I had to trade to get the number 26 pick, which cost me a second round pick and a third round pick. So ultimately, the Bears were able to get Darnell Wright, offensive tackle out of Tennessee, at pick 26. So Darnell Wright goes, Bears get their right tackle, seemingly who can play for the Bears. Comp, kind of DJ Fluker. He's 6'5", 333 pounds. This dude is a big boy. Strength is his power. Weakness, still has some poor feet and balance, and also really has had one good season on tape, of really good tape. He's been going back and forth on some left tackle, but last year he was really kind of able to focus in at that right tackle spot. Now, something that is a big question mark is the scheme fit. He played a lot of snaps in a gap-based system, and with his strength, has predominantly played a gap-based system. But when you look at what the Chiefs did, right? The Chiefs end up drafting the guard out of Tennessee, who has played a lot of gap-based schemes and ends up playing well in the zone-based scheme of Kansas City. So are the Bears going to be looking at Tennessee again and seeing a Darnell Wright and say, we can have this guy start at right tackle? And yeah, he didn't play a heavy zone scheme. That doesn't really matter. The dude can move bodies. So why not get someone like that? So other thing too, top 10 recruit, got better every single year. So similar to what we saw with Wanya, where he got better every single year, but Darnell Wright had a lot higher level of production at the end. And also kind of his signature game was him doing very well against arguably the best player in the draft, Will Anderson. So that really turned a lot of heads. But yeah, big guy, not super, super agile. That's where the big question will be. But also, got to bring this up. Look good at the Senior Bowl, which we all know one Brian Poles loves himself some Senior Bowl. So that's where Darnell Wright could be a favorite, where, essentially Brian Poles says, this is a guy that I have to trade up for and have to go with Darnell Wright. But also, last little bit, 99.1% pass block efficiency, which was fourth best in the NCAA. I believe in the Power Five, it was just behind Peter Skoronski and maybe Paris Johnson, I believe. But still, very good prospect, and someone that you can get later on in the first. I'm not a big fan of trading up, but for me, I do kind of like this because I don't trust a lot of the offensive line picks later on in the draft. But now, what does that do to the rest of the Bears draft, right? We're down a second round pick. We're down a third round pick. So what happened in my mock draft is when I went down, the defensive tackles were all gone. Yet again, the Draft Network loves drafting defensive tackles, like Zach Pickens, who was supposed to go in the fourth round out of South Carolina, was off the board. I'm like, well, crap. I kind of have to go defensive end. So with defensive end, I went with Isaiah Foskey, someone who I like out of Notre Dame. Yet again, kind of the comp is Yannick Ngakoue. Yannick Ngakoue, very known for just being a pass rusher. That's what Isaiah Foskey does well. Move forward. But his biggest con, we've talked about this before, is really setting that edge. Sack leader at Notre Dame with 26.5. Now, this is something too. If the Bears were to trade up, if the Bears were to do something like this, I think if I'm looking at free agency, personally, I think that there's a lot more talent at the defensive end spot. Jadeveon Clowney and Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Houston. There's a lot more veterans that you could potentially bring in that can give you good starter play out there. And yeah, I don't think that Green is going to give you that level of play. I do think you still need a guy in order to be that defensive end. So that's where do the Bears look at this and say, because in this mock draft, the defensive tackles were all off the board. But if a Keanu Benton's still out there, right? Do you bring him in? But also another big question, if a Mozzie Smith, defensive tackle out of Michigan, big guy, nose tackle, if he's there to plug up the middle, Do the Bears want that rather than a 3-tech because they have some of these defensive ends that they've signed that can play more of that 3 technique because of their lighter size? Something just to think about. What could the Bears do if they were to do something like trade up and have even less picks in that kind of top 90? Well, let's keep on going down with my next pick. I'm just going to do, I believe, one more round, and it's just cornerback Tyreek Stevenson. Nothing too sexy out there. He ended up dropping cornerback out of Miami, but yet again, there's still a good amount of corners. Moral of the story, 4th round, there should be some corners that the Bears can get. Tyreek Stevenson can play on the outside, really good length at the cornerback position. Projected to go in the 2nd round, ends up falling to 104 in the TDN mock draft machine. But then last, we just talked about Devon Achane. I was like, you know what, I got to go running back again. I haven't shown this guy enough love. He's someone that's very impressive on tape for me. So that's something that I really like. So Devon Achane gets selected for the Bears so that they have a home run threat, another home run threat at the running back position. But overall, this is JSN no matter what. And then you do JSN no matter what, but crap, we need a right tackle to protect our quarterback. But arguably, too, this is where you start to see the people that talk about the Bengals, right? The Bengals they went with Jamar Chase rather than Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell, still a good offensive lineman out there, but Jamar Chase was a different type of a prospect than a Jackson Smith-Njigba. But to be fair, Jackson Smith-Njigba, like we've said, is a quarterback's best friend. So if you can have that person that you know where they're at, does that make his reaction time a little bit quicker? But to me, I've seen a lot of people say, just get someone in the 2nd round. And in my opinion, I don't think you can get a good offensive tackle in the 2nd round that you feel comfortable with starting, especially since you don't have someone. And I've said this before on the show, offensive tackle is very difficult to hide because you have to play there every single snap. If you go with an Isaiah Foskey or another defensive end or defensive tackle, you can hide them because they don't have to play every single snap on defense, right? Offensive tackles do. So that's where I really do think ultimately, even though I don't have, like, yet again, the exercises today was what would happen if the Bears don't draft an offensive tackle. I'm here to say, I hope that they do draft an offensive tackle with the 9th pick, or maybe trade down a couple picks, because it's really, it's very, very, very necessary. And if they don't, I like the idea of them trading up to try and get a Darnell Wright. I like Darnell Wright more than an Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma a little bit more. So to me, Darnell Wright should be the guy if the Bears can trade up, or screw it and they just trade down. And they just trade farther down and just go with Darnell Wright. But let's go to my next mock. This is just going to be a little quick. I won't be breaking it down too much. I just wanted to see what would happen if I did, in fact, trade down, because life isn't a simulation. I mean, maybe it is, but let's not get philosophical. This is a simulation, and I was able to trade down. It's a little difficult to see. I'm going to try and max this out a little bit more for those watching. But ultimately, what I ended up going with is Jackson Smith-Njigba was kind of the best on the board. Like, for some reason, all the offensive tackles were gone, and I ended up trading the 9th pick for the 18th pick and the 56th pick. So we were able to get a 2nd round pick out of it, and ultimately I had the Bears going Jackson Smith-Njigba, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, and then Mozzie Smith, defensive lineman out of Michigan, fell to the Bears, ended up getting him. Picked up cornerback Deonte Banks, who fell, cornerback out of Maryland. But yet again, lots of other cornerbacks were there, and ultimately went with Blake Freeland as the offensive tackle. Offensive tackle out of BYU. Yet again, a very mobile guy, fits his own system. I like him. He's got the prototypical size, but it's just this, or prototypical frame, but not necessarily the strength. So overall, he does need to get a little bit bigger, but there's a couple other people. I'll just fly through these guys. Jamie Robinson, safety out of Florida State. He's a very good zone corner, and the Bears, they don't need a starting safety, or the very good starting safety, zone safety. Bears don't need a starting safety, but he's someone that is good, that can be out there for the future. And if someone were to go down, Noah Sewell, linebacker out of Oregon, don't need a linebacker, but he fell, and he's more of an attacking linebacker. Devon Achane, again, running back out of Texas A&M. Nick Saldiveri, offensive tackle out of Old Dominican. Some people think that he's kind of a hidden gem, but he's got all the tools and traits to play offensive tackle. Juice Scruggs, interior offensive lineman out of Penn State, who can play center for the Bears. Isaiah McGuire, again, edge out of Missouri. And Kobe Turner, interior D lineman out of Wake Forest. That one was 7 rounds, so a little bit different. But, man, I got to just say, the Draft Network, I loved their mock draft simulator before, but I got to say with this one, there's a little bit too much variance. I used to always think that theirs was kind of the gold standard. Like, it was always great, and it always seemed very, very like non-biased. I think that they added a little bit of their bias into this as well, which I don't necessarily love. And I think when you go to different mock drafts simulators, PFFs is heavy PFF, and then you go to other ones and they're just kind of all over the place. So it was interesting. It was fun. I definitely suggest people to try it out, and let me know what you think of the Draft Network's mock draft simulator. It was fun. It was interesting. I did have a couple where the Bears drafted like a bunch of amazing players, like every single round, but it was different for sure. But guys, thank you for joining me flying solo on a mock draft Monday. Hopefully you guys liked what we had. And also in 2 weeks, we'll actually do our legit last mock draft and what we actually think is going on, rather than kind of running through some fun scenarios. I always love doing stuff like this. So I hope you liked it too. Hope you like and subscribe. PayPal should be on the next one. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bride.